Hello. I don't even know where to start, but I feel like I need to get this out somewhere, and maybe some of you have been through something similar. My wife, Darla, and I have been married for 7 years. 7 years of what I thought was a solid, happy marriage. We've had our ups and downs like anyone else, but nothing that ever made me question our relationship. Steady jobs, a cozy little home, and no major drama to speak of. But the past month has been different. And I can't shake this nagging feeling that something's wrong. It started about 3 weeks ago. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. and realized Darla wasn't in bed. At first, I thought maybe she was in the bathroom or had gone to the kitchen for a drink of water. But when I got up to check, I couldn't find her anywhere upstairs. I went downstairs, expecting to find her on the couch or maybe scrolling through her phone in the living room. Instead, I found her standing by the front door, still wearing her coat, like she had just come back inside. She was startled when she saw me, just for a split second, but long enough that I noticed. I asked her what she was doing, and she barely hesitated before answering. She told me she'd been called in for an emergency at work. Now, Darla's a middle school teacher. An emergency at 2 a.m.? It didn't make any sense. I asked her what kind of emergency, and she said a colleague needed help with lesson planning for a workshop. She even added that the colleague was going through a tough time and needed her support. It was such a specific story that I didn't push further, but the whole thing felt off. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the scene over and over. Teachers don't get midnight emergencies. Even if a friend was struggling, who would call someone in the middle of the night for lesson planning? The story just didn't hold water. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. Darla's always been good at connecting with people. She's the type of person who goes out of her way to help others. Maybe she really was just being a good friend. But once the idea that something was wrong took root, I couldn't let it go. I started noticing other things. Darla seemed more distracted lately, always on her phone. I'd catch her smiling at texts she never shared with me, or she'd lock herself in the bathroom for 20 minutes at a time with her phone. That wasn't like her. She'd always been open about her phone before, leaving it on the counter or handing it to me if she needed help with something. Then there was the way she started dressing. Don't get me wrong, Darla's always been stylish. But suddenly, she was putting on high heels to run to the grocery store or wearing red lipstick for errands. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she just wanted to feel good about herself. But combined with everything else, it started to feel like there was a pattern. I'll admit, I let curiosity and paranoia get the better of me one day. While she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. That's when I saw she'd added a lock screen password. She never had one before. When I casually asked her about it later, she said it was because a student had grabbed her phone during class, and she wanted to be cautious. It sounded reasonable enough, but deep down, I wasn't convinced. And then there's me. For about a month now, I've been feeling unbelievably tired. It's not the kind of tired you can shake off with a nap or a good night's sleep. It's this bone-deep exhaustion that hits me every evening, like clockwork. By 7 p.m., I can barely keep my eyes open. At first, I chalked it up to stress. I work in IT, so long hours and mental fatigue aren't unusual. But this felt different. I started wondering if I was pushing myself too hard at the gym. Darla and I joined a new fitness club a few months ago, and she encouraged me to sign up for sessions with this trainer, Steve. He's one of those guys who looks like he walked out of a fitness magazine. Always energetic, always pushing me to go harder. Steve's been giving me these protein shakes to help with recovery. At first, I thought they were great. I'd feel sore after a workout, but the shakes seemed to help me bounce back faster. But lately, I don't know. The fatigue has gotten worse, not better. It's so intense that I've started wondering if something's wrong with me. I told Darla I was going to see a doctor about it, and her reaction was strange. She tried to talk me out of it, saying it was probably just seasonal stuff or that I was overdoing it at the gym. She even suggested I take a break from the workouts altogether, which seemed out of character since she's usually so enthusiastic about fitness. It didn't make sense. Why wouldn't she want me to figure out what was going on? All of this has left me feeling paranoid. I don't want to accuse her of anything, because what if I'm wrong? What if she really is just helping a friend or going through a phase? What if I'm blowing things out of proportion? But every time I see her texting someone she won't name, or dressing up to leave the house late at night, or smiling at her phone like it holds some secret, I get this sinking feeling in my gut. Am I crazy? Am I overthinking this? I just needed to vent, and maybe some of you have been in a similar place. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because right now, I feel like I'm losing my grip on what's real. A few days later, I finally went to the doctor. I couldn't keep ignoring the overwhelming fatigue that had been dragging me down for weeks. I told him everything, how it didn't feel normal, how it came on so suddenly, and how it was affecting every part of my life. I admitted that I was worried something serious might be wrong, maybe a deficiency, or worse, some underlying condition I didn't know about. What I didn't tell him was that I hadn't shared this visit with Darla. Honestly, I didn't see the point. The way she'd reacted when I mentioned going to the doctor still bothered me. She'd been so quick to dismiss my concerns like they didn't matter. I didn't want to have that argument again, especially when I wasn't sure what was going on. The doctor listened carefully and ran a battery of tests. Blood work, hormone levels, you name it. I left the clinic with a mix of relief and anxiety, knowing I'd taken a step toward answers, but dreading what those answers might be. When the results came back a few days later, they were strange, really strange. My blood test showed unusually high levels of benzodiazepines, a class of drugs typically used as sedatives or anti-anxiety medication. The doctor was clearly concerned. He asked if I'd been prescribed them or if I might have taken them unknowingly. I told him no, absolutely not. I'd never been prescribed anything like that, and I wasn't the kind of person to take random pills. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Someone had to be giving them to me without my knowledge. And that's when everything started clicking in a terrifying way. The fatigue. The way it seemed to hit me harder after I started drinking those protein shakes Steve had recommended. I trusted him. He was my trainer after all, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Could it really be that simple? Was I being drugged through something I thought was meant to help me? I needed to know for sure. I wasn't about to jump to conclusions or accuse anyone without proof, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. I brought one of the protein powder tubs Steve had sold me to a private lab for analysis. It wasn't a straightforward process. I had to go through a lawyer to make sure everything was above board. But at that point, I was willing to go the extra mile to get answers. A week later, the results came back. The protein powder was spiked with sedatives. I can't even describe what I felt in that moment. Disgust, anger, fear, but more than anything, betrayal. It wasn't just about the fact that someone had been drugging me. It was the why that haunted me. Why would Steve, a guy I barely knew outside the gym, do something like this? What did he have to gain by keeping me so out of it all the time? And then, of course, the thought hit me. What if he wasn't acting alone? That's when everything started to fall into place. I thought about how hard Darla had pushed me to sign up for personal training with Steve, even though I'd been perfectly content with my own workout routine. I thought about how she'd been acting so differently lately, more secretive, more distracted, more distant. Her late-night outings, her sudden need for privacy on her phone. It all started to paint a picture I didn't want to see. But here's the thing. I still wasn't 100% sure about Darla's involvement. I couldn't be. My heart didn't want to believe that the woman I'd loved for 7 years could do something so calculated, so cruel. Maybe it was just Steve acting alone. Maybe there was some other explanation. I decided to play it cool. I stopped drinking the shakes entirely and pretended nothing had changed. When I came home from the gym, I acted as drained as ever. I went to bed early, faked exhaustion, and kept up the same routine. I wanted to lull Darla and Steve into a false sense of security while I quietly worked to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, I started paying closer attention to Darla's movements. That's when the pattern became undeniable. Almost every other night, she'd get all dressed up and leave the house after dinner. She'd give me vague excuses, meeting a friend, running errands, attending a school function I'd somehow never heard of. But now that I wasn't foggy and exhausted anymore, I started noticing the inconsistencies. One time, she told me she was going grocery shopping, but when I checked the fridge the next morning, there wasn't a single new item inside. Another time, she left claiming she was going to a late-night yoga class. I know yoga studios don't operate at 11 p.m., but I didn't call her out. Not yet. I needed more than gut feelings or odd excuses. I needed proof. It's like I was living a double life. By day, I was the same clueless husband Darla thought she'd been fooling all along. By night, I was piecing together the mystery of my own life, trying to figure out how deep this betrayal went. I know a lot of people in my shoes might have confronted their partner immediately. I've read stories like that, people blowing up in the heat of the moment, demanding answers, and watching the situation spiral out of control. But I couldn't do that. Not without solid evidence. If Darla was working with Steve, and I tipped my hand too soon, they'd have the chance to cover their tracks. So, I started documenting everything. I kept a log of her outings, noting the times and her excuses. Whenever I caught a glimpse of her phone screen, I'd memorize the call logs or messages I could see. Eventually, I decided to hire a private investigator. It wasn't cheap, but at this point, I needed professional help to confirm my suspicions. I didn't want to rely solely on what I could piece together on my own. Now, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something huge, something that's going to blow my whole life apart. Part of me doesn't even want to know what I'm going to find, because once I do, there's no going back. But the other part of me, the part that's been lied to, drugged, and taken for a fool, that part of me needs to see this through. I deserve to know the truth, no matter how ugly it is. Last week, I followed Darla myself. It started like any other evening. She made dinner, something simple, pasta and salad. We sat across from each other at the dining table, making small talk like we always did. She asked me about my day, nodding and smiling as I told her about some mundane work issues, and I asked her about hers. She mentioned a meeting at school and some paperwork she needed to catch up on. Nothing about her demeanor seemed unusual, but the way she avoided holding my gaze for too long made me suspicious. Around 9 p.m., she excused herself, saying she was heading out to meet a coworker for coffee. She said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I nodded, pretending to be absorbed in a work email on my laptop, but my stomach was already churning. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, I closed my laptop, grabbed my jacket, and called a cab. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. The whole ride to follow her, I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if this is all in my head? What if she really is just meeting a coworker for coffee? But part of me already knew the truth. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. I told the cab driver to keep some distance, not wanting her to notice a car following her. We trailed her through familiar streets until she pulled into a neighborhood I didn't recognize. She slowed her car and turned into the driveway of a small, well-kept house with a neatly trimmed lawn. I asked the cab driver to stop a few houses down. The neighborhood was quiet, with only a few porch lights glowing in the dark. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, so loud I thought it might drown out the silence around me. I watched as Darla stepped out of her car, smoothing down her dress. She looked radiant, like she'd taken extra care with her appearance. She glanced around quickly, then walked up to the front door. I held my breath as she knocked. The door opened, and there he was, Steve. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the world. Everything around me blurred as I focused on the sight of them together. Steve said something. I couldn't hear what, and Darla laughed, throwing her head back in a way that felt so familiar it made me sick. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that door. Minutes? Hours? It felt like time had stopped. My mind raced with memories of our life together. The vacations, the lazy weekends on the couch, the quiet moments where she'd reach out and take my hand for no reason at all. Every memory felt like a lie, a cruel joke I hadn't been in on. Eventually, I told the cab driver to take me home. Confronting her in that moment crossed my mind, but I knew I couldn't do it. I was too angry, too hurt, and I didn't trust myself not to explode. And more than that, I didn't want to give her the chance to twist the narrative or manipulate the situation. When Darla walked through the door around midnight, she looked happy, almost glowing. She kicked off her heels and smiled at me like she hadn't just spent the evening with another man. "Hey," she said casually. "Didn't expect you to still be up." I forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips cold from the night air, and headed to the bathroom to wash up. I sat there on the couch, staring at the floor, feeling a strange mix of rage and resignation. In the days that followed, it was like I was living in a surreal, alternate reality. I knew the truth, but I couldn't act on it yet. Every time she smiled at me or brushed my arm in passing, it felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. How could she pretend everything was normal? How long had she been lying to me? And, maybe worst of all, did any part of her still care about me? I'll admit, there were moments when I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to make her see the pain she'd caused. But every time I got close to breaking, I reminded myself of the bigger picture. This wasn't about venting my anger. It was about protecting myself and making sure I had everything I needed to walk away on my own terms. The private investigator I'd hired came through for me too. He sent me photos of Darla and Steve meeting at the gym, sneaking off together during the day, and even entering the same hotel on one occasion. Seeing those images felt like a punch to the gut. There was no denying it anymore. But strangely, the hardest part of all this wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing how much of myself I'd lost in this relationship. I started questioning everything. Was I not enough? Had I failed her in some way? Could I have done something to stop this from happening? Those questions haunted me in the dead of night, swirling in my mind as I lay awake staring at the ceiling. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't about me. Darla made a choice, a selfish, hurtful choice, and no amount of self-blame could change that. I started seeing a therapist, which was one of the best decisions I've made throughout this ordeal. He helped me untangle the mess of emotions I was dealing with: anger, sadness, guilt, and reminded me that it was okay to grieve. Grieve for the marriage I thought I had, for the person I thought Darla was, for the life I'd envisioned for us. At the same time, I began preparing for the next steps. I spoke to my lawyer again, gathering every piece of evidence I had. The test results from the protein powder, the photos, the timeline of her late-night outings. I haven't confronted Darla yet. I don't think she has any idea that I know. Part of me hates the secrecy, but another part of me feels like it's the only way to regain control in a situation where I've felt so powerless. This whole ordeal has been a nightmare. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that I'm stronger than I thought. After following Darla that night and confirming her affair with Steve, I knew I couldn't keep living in limbo. Every day spent pretending everything was fine felt like a slow death. I'd sit across from her at the dinner table or pass her in the hallway, and the weight of what I knew would press down on me until it was hard to breathe. As much as I wanted to avoid confrontation, I couldn't keep pretending. I had to face reality and take the steps to end our marriage. The first thing I did was schedule another meeting with my lawyer. This time, I laid everything on the table. The tampered protein powder, the medical test results showing sedatives in my system, the private investigator's findings, and the photos of Darla and Steve together. I could see the concern in my lawyer's expression as I spoke. He was meticulous, walking me through which pieces of evidence would be most useful and how we could proceed in a way that protected me legally and financially. He also gave me advice that I wasn't expecting but desperately needed: stay calm. Avoid impulsive decisions. That was easier said than done. Every fiber of my being wanted to blow up, to scream at Darla for what she'd done, to confront Steve and demand answers. But I knew my lawyer was right. Acting out of anger would only hurt my case, and I couldn't afford to lose control now. From that point on, everything I did was calculated. I started by taking steps to protect my assets. Darla and I had a joint checking account, so I quietly opened a separate account in my name. I didn't clean out the joint account. I didn't want to raise any alarms, but I began moving portions of my paycheck into my personal account each week, just enough to ensure I'd have a financial cushion if things got messy. Next, I gathered copies of every important document I could think of: mortgage papers, car titles, insurance policies, bank statements, and even old tax returns. It felt surreal, almost like I was preparing for a battle. In a way, I guess I was. Emotionally, though, it was grueling. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between maintaining the illusion of normalcy and quietly dismantling the life we'd built together. I started noticing little things I hadn't before, things that made her betrayal cut even deeper. The way she'd hum to herself while texting him, a soft smile playing on her lips. How she'd dress just a little nicer on days she claimed to be running errands or meeting friends. Even her perfume smelled different now, stronger, bolder. I wondered if it was something Steve had complimented her on, a change she'd made just for him. And yet, despite everything, she acted like nothing was wrong. One night, we were watching TV together, and she rested her head on my shoulder. It was such a casual, intimate gesture, the kind you'd expect from someone who loved you. But I sat there frozen, unable to reconcile the warmth of that moment with the cold reality of what I knew she was doing behind my back. For a while, I wrestled with the idea of confronting her. I imagined 100 different scenarios in my head, yelling, crying, demanding answers. But every time I got close to saying something, I stopped myself. Confrontation would give her control of the narrative, and I wasn't ready for that. I needed to make sure I could leave on my own terms. So, I kept collecting evidence. One evening, I pretended to go to bed early and left my phone recording audio in the living room. Sure enough, about an hour later, I heard her on the phone with Steve. She was laughing, whispering, talking about their next meetup. Hearing her voice like that, so light, so carefree, was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe she could sound so happy while I was sitting upstairs, trying to figure out how to salvage my life. The hardest part came a week later. Darla had gone out to meet friends, and I decided to take one last look through her things. I wasn't proud of snooping, but at that point I felt like I had no choice. Tucked away in her purse, I found what I expected and dreaded: a receipt for a hotel room. The date matched one of the nights she'd claimed to have been at a school function. There was the final nail in the coffin. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt empty, like there was nothing left to salvage. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him I was ready to proceed with the divorce. He helped me draft a letter to Darla, explaining that I knew about the affair and that I wanted to separate. I didn't want to ambush her with it, so I waited until she came home from work. When she walked through the door, I asked her to sit down. My voice was calm, too calm maybe because she gave me a wary look. "What's going on?" she asked. I slid the letter across the table. "Read it." She opened it and started reading. As her eyes moved across the page, her expression shifted from confusion to shock to something that almost looked like fear. When she finished, she looked up at me, her face pale. Riley, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I said, cutting her off. My voice didn't even shake, which surprised me. "I know about you and Steve. I know about the hotel, the late-night meetups, everything. And I know about the protein powder." Her mouth opened and closed like she didn't know what to say. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I continued. "I'm filing for divorce. You'll hear from him soon." She started crying, big, dramatic sobs that felt more like a performance than genuine regret. She begged me to talk, to let her explain, but I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. Whatever she had to say, it wasn't going to change the fact that she betrayed me in ways I never thought possible. After that, I moved into the guest bedroom while we worked out the logistics. She tried to act like she was sorry, but every time I looked at her, all I could see was the woman who had lied to my face for months. Right now, we're in the middle of finalizing the divorce. I'm still seeing my therapist, and he's been a huge help in keeping me grounded. It hasn't been easy, but I'm starting to see a way forward. Every day, the pain feels a little less sharp, And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm taking back control of my life. It's been a few weeks since everything came to light, and while the dust hasn't fully settled, I feel like I'm finally able to breathe again. Each day feels like a step forward, no matter how small. The divorce is officially underway, and I've moved out of the house. I found a modest apartment on the other side of town. Not too far from work, but far enough away to feel like I've started a new chapter. Packing up my belongings was harder than I expected. Every item, from coffee mugs to old photo albums, seemed to hold a memory. Some were happy, but now even those felt tainted. Leaving the home Darla and I built together was gut-wrenching. That house had been the backdrop to so many chapters of our life. The joy of hosting our first Thanksgiving, the lazy Sundays spent binge-watching TV, the nights we stayed up late talking about our dreams for the future. But staying there? That would have been even harder. Every corner of that house felt like a reminder of what I thought we had and what she destroyed. Darla's been unpredictable since everything came to light. Some days, she sends long, emotional texts begging for forgiveness. She tells me she made a mistake, that she still loves me, and that we can fix things if I give her a chance. Other days, she swings to the opposite extreme, accusing me of overreacting or downplaying what happened. Steve didn't mean anything. She's written more than once, as if that makes it better. I've stopped responding altogether. My lawyer advised me to let him handle all communication moving forward, and honestly, it's been a relief. Detaching from the constant back and forth has been one of the healthiest decisions I've made. I don't need to engage with her excuses or her attempts to shift the blame. I wish I could say I've found closure, but the truth is, I'm still working through it. Betrayal like this doesn't just go away overnight. There are moments when I replay everything in my head, wondering how I missed the signs or if there was something I could have done differently. Was there a point where I could have saved our marriage? Should I have noticed sooner? But here's the thing I've come to realize. Darla's actions weren't about me. They were about her. Her choices, her dishonesty, her selfishness. Nothing I did or didn't do gave her permission to betray me like that. That realization has been a hard pill to swallow, but it's also been freeing in its own way. As for Steve, he's not even worth the energy to hate. From what I've heard through mutual acquaintances, their little romance has already fizzled out. Apparently, sneaking around and meeting in secret was a lot more thrilling than dealing with each other's realities. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in hearing that, but mostly I just feel indifferent. They're not my problem anymore. What's been more important to me than thinking about them is focusing on myself. Therapy has been an absolute lifeline. My therapist has helped me unpack the waves of emotions that hit me, anger, sadness, guilt, confusion, and reminded me that healing isn't linear. Some days are better than others, and that's okay. What matters is that I keep moving forward, no matter how slow the progress feels. Reconnecting with old friends has also been a huge part of my healing process. For years, I let my social circle shrink because I was so focused on my marriage. It's only now that I realize how much I isolated myself without even meaning to. Thankfully, my friends have been incredibly supportive. Whether it's grabbing a drink, going hiking, or just sitting and letting me vent, they've reminded me that I'm not alone. One of the biggest lessons I've learned through all of this is the importance of trusting my instincts. Looking back, there were so many little signs that something was off, but I ignored them. I didn't want to believe Darla was capable of betraying me. I told myself I was paranoid, overthinking, insecure. Now I know better. Blind trust isn't the same as healthy trust, and it's okay to ask questions when something feels wrong. If there's one thing I hope others take from my experience, it's this. Pay attention to changes in behavior. They might not always mean something's wrong, but don't dismiss them outright. If your gut is telling you something's off, listen to it. Document everything. It might feel sneaky or underhanded, but if you suspect you're being lied to, having evidence can protect you in ways you don't even realize yet. Take care of your mental and physical health. Betrayal takes a huge toll on your body and mind. Prioritize self-care and don't hesitate to seek professional help. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. Lean on your support system, friends, family, therapists, whoever you trust. You don't have to go through this alone. Know your worth. Being cheated on can leave you questioning yourself. But remember, their betrayal is a reflection of them, not you. You deserve honesty, respect, and love. As for me, I'm taking things one day at a time. I started running in the mornings. It clears my head and gives me a sense of accomplishment. I'm thinking about picking up a new hobby, maybe learning to cook or taking a photography class. For the first time in a long time, I'm focusing on what I want, and it feels freeing. Will I ever trust someone again? Honestly, I don't know. The idea of putting my heart on the line feels terrifying right now. But I refuse to let what Darla did turn me into a bitter, closed-off person. Life's too short for that. Thank you for listening to me. Writing all of this out has been therapeutic in its own way. Betrayal is devastating, but it doesn't have to define you. I may have lost a marriage, but I'm finding myself again, and that's something worth fighting for. What advice would you give to move on after a betrayal?